the Democratic Republic of Congo, Central African Republic, Chad, and Sudan are identified as the African countries most susceptible to regime change. Now, additionally, nations like Burkina Faso, Gabon, Guinea-Bissau, and Niger have recently experienced coups ranked lower on the stability scale. Now, Ghana has been classified as stable. However, the risk indicators, including CD depreciation, rising poverty levels, and spiking cost of living, puts the country in difficult situation. Thankfully, we've been joined via Zoom by Ekimenes Ifeanyong, partner at Head of Research at SBM Intelligence in Lagos, to discuss the impact of these risk factors on the country. Basically, let's focus on Ghana. Thanks so much, sir, for joining me here on Business Live. Tell us more about these risk reports, especially your findings on countries that have recently experienced coup.
Thank you so much for having me. So what we tried to do with this report, the Africa Country Instability Risk Index, or ACIRI as we like to call it, was to basically rank all sub-Saharan African countries based on their potential for violent regime change. Now, you and your listeners are well aware of the fact that this year we've had a coup d'etats in Niger and in Gabon, West and Central Africa, since 2020 has re-emerged as sort of the world's coup belt. And so we wanted to understand what some of the risk indicators, right, were across Africa, and measure those in terms of the susceptibility of countries to, to regress from, democracy and popular democratic participation to autocratic authoritarian rule. And we basically measure these indicators against four broad categories. We looked at the history of a country. So if you've had a coup in the past or some kind of violent government change, then that's an important indicator as to whether that could happen in the future. We obviously looked at the current state of leadership and governance in the country, whether elections were properly conducted, people are involved in sort of the governance, and there is broad participation in the country's leadership, or if that country was either autocratic or authoritarian. We also obviously looked at the economy, because a lot of the countries that have had violent government takeovers recently have been dire economic straits. And we also looked at geopolitics, so the level of big power geopolitical interest and the level of influence that they exert on a country's domestic political and economic affairs, too, especially with what we're seeing, for example, in Eastern Europe or in the Middle East. It's clear that we're entering a more active geopolitical environment, and the level of involvement that a superpower like, say, the United States, or like or like Russia or like China has, and the level of dominance they exert in any given country is an indication of big power interest. So that's basically what we tried to measure with ACIRI, and we basically just measured countries from critical to vulnerable to safe and stable, which is what accounts for.
All right. So for countries like Ghana, though classified stable, have risk factors such as economic crisis and standard of living issues. Help us understand this and how we can navigate out of that.
Yeah, so the general way we look at this, right, is that a country with, a stable and a prosperous economy is much more likely to be democratic, is much more likely to be free and open, and, its government is less likely to be the target, rather, of opposition or malign, right, elements, right, as it were. So the key challenge, right, with Ghana is that while Ghana scores pretty well on indicators like leadership and governance, you've obviously had a consistent and a peaceful change of of power and governance since 1992. Your history in fairly recent times, right, has been fairly stable, right? In terms of the economy, and to a lesser extent in terms of geopolitics, there are important risk items to look at. The cost of living crisis, inflation is certainly elevated. There's obviously the larger conversation, right, around the country's debt situation, which could create a possible avenue of increased big power and geopolitical interest in the country's affairs, especially if the IMF and the World Bank begins to have an outsized say in monetary and fiscal policy setting. And so because of that, right, while Ghana is not in any danger anytime soon, right, of a coup d'etat, you could begin to see stressors and weaknesses that begin to, because of the economic situation, that begins to percolate into the economy if there are quarrels and conversations, and there are fights over budgets, for example, how resources are allocated, who is going to take debt haircuts, and the likes. And so because of those, important concerns still remain, even though the general and the broad picture is that Ghana is in a relatively good place.
All right. Thank you very much, Ms. Efeyon, for your time here on Business Life. He's the head research speaking to us there.